The space station Cauldron 5 floated silently above the swirling clouds of the gas giant Velos, a massive silver ring of metal and glass spinning slowly in the void. Built by the Zenthari, an advanced alien species known for their intelligence and precision, the station was a scientific marvel. At its heart, deep in the lowest sector, sat the most powerful energy source ever created, a zero-point reactor. It had the strength to power 100 planets, to reshape galaxies. It was their proudest invention, and their most dangerous. That day, something went wrong. It began with a hum, nothing loud, just a vibration through the walls, barely noticeable at first. Then came a flicker in the lights, followed by a soft tremble in the floor. The engineers looked up from their consoles. Taller, the chief reactor overseer, narrowed his eyes at the readouts. Core temperature rising, he muttered. One by one, alerts began to light up on the control panels. First yellow, then orange, then red. A piercing alarm screamed through. The station as the main screen flashed warnings in multiple languages. Reactor instability detected. Containment breach imminent. Panic spread like wildfire. Zenthari engineers shouted commands, their long limbs moving quickly over control surfaces. Emergency drones flew out of their bays, spraying coolant and attempting to stabilize the core. Thick security doors began to seal, locking down the lower levels. But it was too late. The reactor was going critical. Molten light oozed from cracks in the core's surface. The containment field buzzed and flickered like a dying star. Plasma began leaking into the chamber, melting the floor panels. The backup systems failed one by one, overwhelmed by the sheer power now surging out of the reactor's heart. Taller's hands trembled. "We must evacuate. There's nothing more we can do." His second-in-command, a young Zenthari named Quarrel, shook his head in disbelief. "What about the crew on level 3? They're trapped." Before Taller could respond, a figure appeared on the security monitor. A tall, broad-shouldered man in charred armor sprinting down a hallway filled with fire and falling debris. It was a human, Commander Eric Voss. His helmet was off. His face was streaked with ash and sweat, eyes locked with deadly focus. Sparks flew as the walls behind him collapsed, but he kept running, slamming his shoulder into the final bulkhead door leading to the reactor chamber. It groaned under the force but held shut. From the control room, Taller activated the comm. "Human, you cannot go in there. The core is unstable. You will die." Eric's voice came through, calm but firm. "Not if I can shut it down first." "No, one has survived even 5 seconds inside that chamber. I don't need 5 seconds, just a chance." And then, without waiting for permission, Eric pried the emergency lock open and forced his way into the reactor room. The heat inside was beyond anything that should be survivable. The walls glowed red, metal melted like wax. The air shimmered and twisted with raw radiation. At the center of it all, the core pulsed wildly, blue-white light flaring like a star going nova. Eric ran straight toward it. In one hand, he held a stabilizer core, experimental tech that hadn't been tested. In the other, a cooling rod stripped from the backup rig. He slammed both into the emergency slot beside the reactor, gritting his teeth as the heat scorched his skin and his vision blurred. His body screamed in pain, and then everything went white. The explosion shook the entire station. A fireball bloomed out of the lower levels, lighting up space like a second sun. The shockwave knocked power offline. Silence followed. Deep, complete, terrifying silence. For a long time, no one moved. Taller stared at the screens, most of them now cracked or black. The engineers were too shocked to speak. They all thought the same thing. Eric Voss was dead. And yet, deep in the ruins of the melted reactor, something stirred. A faint signal blinked on the rescue scanners. A heartbeat. After the explosion, Cauldron 5 was a twisted wreck. The once proud space station now looked like a shattered shell drifting in the cold dark. Fires burned in pockets, casting flickering orange light on broken metal and drifting debris. The great zero-point reactor, which had powered the station and promised endless energy, was reduced to molten slag and twisted wires. Rescue teams arrived hours later, moving cautiously through the wreckage. The air was thick with smoke, and strange electrical discharges crackled from damaged systems. The Zenthari engineers and medics worked quickly, scanning the ruins for any signs of survivors. Most of them had already given up hope. The reactor core had exploded with a force no one could survive. It was the end of anyone trapped inside. But then the scanners picked up something faint, a slow, steady pulse. It was a heartbeat. The rescue team moved to the source and found a human figure lying among the rubble. His armor was burned black and his skin was scorched and blistered, but he was alive, breathing, moving just barely. Commander Eric Voss. No, one could believe it. The scans showed that his body had absorbed far more radiation and heat than any living creature should handle. His blood cells were damaged, his lungs partially collapsed from the intense heat. And yet he breathed steadily, his pulse weak but steady. The Zenthari medics rushed him to the medical bay, surrounding him with monitors and machines that beeped urgently. Doctors ran tests. They were baffled. His vital signs were abnormal but stable. The radiation in his body should have killed him instantly. His cells should have broken down under the immense heat and pressure inside the reactor chamber. Yet here he was, alive against all odds. "What is he?" one doctor whispered in disbelief. A senior scientist shook his head slowly. "He's something else." Eric lay unconscious for hours. The medics worked tirelessly, applying cooling, gels, radiation blockers, and healing nanobots. Outside the medbay, the station's engineers gathered, their faces pale. Toller, the chief engineer, stood among them, his expression grim. "If this man survived what the reactor did," he said, quietly, "we need to understand what that means. This changes everything." His voice was shaking, not from fear of failure, but from the dawning realization of how dangerous humans really were. If one of them could survive such a meltdown, then what else were they capable of? Rumors quickly spread throughout the station. Whispers about the human who had walked into a death trap and come out alive. Zenthari scientists debated in hushed tones, some skeptical, others terrified. They compared human biology to their own and other species they had encountered. None had anything close to that kind of endurance. More scans and medical data came in. Eric's body was adapting, repairing damaged cells at an incredible rate. His immune system fought off infections that would have killed any alien in minutes. His skin healed burns almost overnight. Even radiation levels in his blood were dropping faster than expected. It was like his body was built to survive impossible conditions. Toller met with the station's commander and council members. "The human survival means our technology is flawed. If this is what they can endure, then we cannot assume they are vulnerable like other species. But what do we do with this knowledge?" the commander asked. "They are allies for now." Toller shook his head. "If humans can survive a reactor meltdown, what will they do in battle? What weapons can harm them? We have always designed with weakness in mind. Now we must rethink everything." Meanwhile, Eric's body was still recovering. When he finally opened his eyes, they burned with determination. He remembered everything: the explosion, the heat, the fire. Pain, yes, but no fear. The Zenthari. Medics prepared to ask him questions, but Eric waved them off. "No time for questions. The reactor might be gone, but the threat is not. You need help." Toller listened carefully. "What threat?" "The Kowalzar swarm," Eric said, his voice steady despite exhaustion. "They're coming, and if you want to live, you need humans." Toller looked at him with new respect and a hint of fear. This human was unlike any they had ever known. He had stared death in the face and kept going. That kind of willpower was both inspiring and terrifying. The engineers and scientists returned to their work, now burdened with the knowledge that humans were far tougher than anyone had imagined. The station had survived the explosion, but the coming war would test them all, and at the center of it stood a man who should have died, Commander Eric Voss, the human who survived a reactor meltdown. The Kowalzar swarm was no ordinary enemy. It was a living nightmare made of countless small ships. each one barely bigger than a hand, swarming like angry hornets across the galaxy. Entire fleets had been lost trying to fight them. They struck, without warning, overwhelming targets with sheer numbers. Their technology was strange and organic, able to heal and adapt quickly. The Xanthari had called for help from every friendly species, but none could stand against the relentless swarm for long. Now, with the reactor meltdown behind them but the station still damaged, the crew of Cauldron 5 worked feverishly to repair their defenses. Taller led the engineers, desperate to rebuild the station's weapons and shield systems before the swarm arrived. Every moment counted. The tension was thick in the corridors, the hum of machinery mixing with anxious voices. Eric, still weak but recovering fast, stood among them. His presence a strange comfort to the alien crew. They had heard stories of human resilience, but to see it firsthand was different. Despite his burns and scars, Eric moved with purpose. He spoke quietly, sharing his ideas about strategy and survival. The Xanthari listened. They needed every advantage. Days passed and scouts reported the swarm's approach. The tiny ships spread across the star systems like an unstoppable wave. The Xanthari fleet prepared for battle, but fear shadowed their efforts. How could they hold against something so vast and merciless? Eric volunteered to lead a strike team. His plan was risky, maybe even reckless, but it was the best chance to slow the swarm. Using captured Khalzar tech and human ingenuity, he helped modify several fighters to operate in new ways. Faster, more agile, and able to deliver precise strikes. The humans and Xanthari worked side by side, blending their knowledge. The first battle was brutal. Eric's squadron launched from Cauldron 5, diving into the dark battlefield among the stars. The swarm came at them in waves, thousands of tiny ships buzzing like angry insects. The fighters darted and weaved, laser fire lighting the void. Explosions bloomed around them as enemy ships were shredded, but many humans and Xanthari fighters fell too. Eric's voice crackled over the comms, steady and calm. Stay sharp. Focus on the core clusters. Disrupt their formation. We're not just fighting ships, we're fighting a living enemy. In the chaos, Eric's fighter took a direct hit. The cockpit shook violently, alarms screaming, but he refused to retreat. Using raw skill and quick thinking, he dodged another attack, maneuvering close to a massive Khalzar mothership. With a precise missile strike, he shattered its control nodes. The mothership faltered, breaking the swarm's attack pattern for a precious few minutes. Back on Cauldron 5, the entire station felt the effect. The swarm's pressure eased, allowing the engineers to repair shields and weapons. It was a small victory, but one that gave hope. After the battle, the pilots gathered, exhausted but alive. Eric's wounds were treated again, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. He spoke plainly. We've only slowed them down. The swarm adapts fast. We need a new plan, a way to hit them where it hurts. The Xanthari commanders debated. Some wanted to retreat and hide, hoping the swarm would move on. But Eric argued for offense. If we let them come to us, they will destroy everything. We must find their source, cut off the head of the beast. The council agreed to let Eric lead a covert mission deep into Khalzar space. It was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but the only way to end the threat. Eric gathered a small team of the best pilots and engineers, humans and aliens together, bound by a shared goal. They prepared their ship, the Resolute, outfitting it with stealth technology and weapons designed to strike hard and vanish. As the ship slipped out of Cauldron 5's orbit, the weight of the mission settled on them. Behind them was a damaged station and a fleet holding the line. Ahead was the unknown, and the heart of the swarm. During the journey, Eric spoke to his crew about human endurance. We're not just survivors, he said. We adapt. We fight harder when things seem impossible. That's what makes us strong. His words settled over the team like a shield. They were ready. When the Resolute finally entered the enemy's space, the crew felt the eerie silence. No stars, no signals, just a dark void filled with unseen dangers. The swarm's homeworld was a massive hive floating in a distant system, covered with twisted structures that looked alive. They sneaked through the outer defenses, evading patrols with cunning and speed. Every second was a test of nerves. Then, they found it. The central core, a living command center that controlled the swarm's mind. Eric looked at the pulsating mass and knew this was the target. If they destroyed it, the swarm would lose its power, its unity. The team prepared for their final strike. The tension was unbearable, but no one faltered. In that moment, humans and Zenthari stood together, ready to face impossible odds. Because if a human could survive a reactor meltdown, then maybe, just maybe, they could survive the swarm and win the war. The Resolute hovered just outside the swirling mass of the Kalzar hive world, a strange living structure that pulsed with eerie light and shifted as if breathing. The crew inside felt a deep weight pressing on them, the feeling of staring into the heart of an ancient predator. Every moment was tense. The smallest mistake could mean death. Eric stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the readings, his mind sharp despite exhaustion. The plan was clear but dangerous. Infiltrate the hive, reach the core, and plant the explosive devices that would sever the swarm's control. If successful, the swarm would collapse into chaos. But the Kalzar were not defenseless. They had sensors attuned to movement and energy changes, and their organic ships reacted almost instantly. As the Resolute slipped through the thick defenses, alarms began to ring. Silent warnings at first, then louder, as patrol ships detected the intruders. Eric's hands moved quickly over controls, deploying stealth fields and countermeasures. The crew worked in perfect harmony. Every second a battle against time. They dodged bursts of biolaser fire, weaving through living tendrils and organic turrets that sprouted from the hive's surface. The tension was so thick it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. But Eric's steady voice over the comms kept everyone focused. Hold together. We're close. The deeper they went, the more the hive seemed to react, as if sensing the threat and rallying all its defenses. A sudden shockwave rocked the Resolute, throwing crew members from their stations. The hull groaned under pressure and vital systems flickered. The swarm was fighting back fiercely. In the chaos, Eric's co-pilot shouted warnings about a rapid hull breach forming near the engine room. The crew scrambled to seal the damage while the ship lurched forward, propelled by emergency thrusters. Outside, dozens of small Kalzar fighters swarmed, attacking with relentless fury. Eric's squadron wasn't here to fight. Stealth and speed were their weapons, but now, with enemies pressing in, they had no choice. Fighters sprang from hidden bays, engaging the attackers in a deadly dance of dogfights. The bridge shook with every hit, and the sound of alarms became a constant roar. Eric gritted his teeth and pushed the ship harder, knowing the success of the mission depended on reaching the core. With sheer determination, the Resolute slipped through a narrow tunnel of pulsating flesh and glowing veins, the entrance to the hive's command center. The crew set charges quickly, their movements precise despite the danger. The ticking countdown echoed like a heartbeat through the ship. Just as they prepared to leave, a massive Kalzar guardian emerged, a monstrous creature part ship, part living beast, towering over the Resolute. Its many eyes glowed with hatred, and it unleashed a blast of corrosive energy that tore through the hull. Sparks flew as systems failed. Eric grabbed the controls, fighting to keep the ship steady. The Guardian lunged again, but the crew fought back, firing plasma bursts and targeting weak spots. With a final surge, the Resolute managed to slip free, escaping the collapsing hive as the explosives detonated. The explosion was immense, shaking the surrounding space as the command core was obliterated. Without its heart, the Kalzar swarm went into disarray. Signals faltered, ships lost coordination, and the relentless pressure eased. Back on Cauldron 5, the fleet sensed the change immediately. The swarm's attack faltered, their advance slowed to a crawl. Cheers broke out among the crews, but Eric knew the battle was not over. The Kalzar would regroup, and the galaxy's war was far from finished. Still, the victory proved one thing. Humans were more than survivors. They were fighters, capable of facing impossible odds and coming back stronger. Eric looked out at the stars, a fierce pride burning in his chest. The engineers who once doubted humans would now know fear and respect. The swarm had been stopped, but the true fight for the future had just begun. The destruction of the Kalzar hive's core sent shockwaves through the galaxy, and for the first time in many cycles, the relentless pressure of the swarm lessened. But the victory was bittersweet. The fleet surrounding Cauldron 5 was battered, many ships damaged or lost, and the crew was exhausted. Still, the humans and their allies had a renewed fire in their hearts. Eric stood on the deck of the flagship, watching the stars beyond the thick viewports, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. The swarm's attack had been stopped, but it had not been destroyed. Intelligence reports showed the Khalzar were retreating but not fleeing. Instead, they were regrouping, healing, and learning from their defeat. The hive was a living entity, one that could adapt and strike back harder. The engineers, once wary of human methods, now regarded Eric and his team with a mix of fear and grudging respect. His survival of the reactor meltdown, his bold strike deep into enemy territory, and his leadership in battle had shifted the balance. Yet there was no time for celebration. The swarm was already launching small raids, probing the defenses of human and allied systems, testing weaknesses. Every contact revealed the Khalzar's terrifying capacity for regeneration and adaptation. The swarm learned quickly, adjusting tactics, evolving new weapons, and growing stronger. In response, Eric and the fleet commanders worked day and night, refining their own strategies, pushing the limits of technology and teamwork. The humans introduced innovations, shields that could absorb and redirect bioenergy, fighters equipped with rapid repair nanobots, and coordinated attack drones that worked like a living swarm against the Khalzar's numbers. Meanwhile, the alliance between humans and alien species deepened. Old rivalries and mistrust gave way to cooperation born from necessity. The Zenthari shared their knowledge of the swarm's biology, while humans brought unmatched resilience and creativity. Eric often found himself in tense meetings with alien leaders discussing war plans and futures alike. He felt the weight of responsibility, not just for his crew but for all who depended on their success. One evening, as the fleet prepared for another encounter, Eric walked the corridors of the flagship. He saw the faces of soldiers and engineers, tired but unbroken. He paused by a young pilot nervously checking her gear. "You ready?" he asked gently. She nodded, determination in her eyes. "We fight for all of us." It was a simple truth that bound them. The next battle came swiftly. The swarm had gathered a massive force, aiming to break through a critical supply route. The space around the route became a deadly maze of flickering fire and explosions. Eric led the defense personally, his fighter weaving through waves of enemies. The battle was intense, every second filled with the roar of weapons and the flash of destruction. Ships on both sides fell, and many moments felt like the edge of doom. But the human pilots fought with a fierce, unyielding spirit. Even when surrounded, they found ways to strike back, using clever tricks and unexpected moves. Eric's squadron managed to break the swarm's formation, causing confusion and chaos. The tide turned as the Allied fleet pressed forward, forcing the Khalzar to retreat again. However, victory came at a cost. Eric's closest friend and wingman, Scylla, was lost in the fight, her ship struck by a swarm vessel in a final act of sacrifice that saved others. The loss shook Eric deeply. In the quiet moments after battle, he stood before the memorial, a simple plaque remembering those who gave their lives. His voice was low as he vowed to honor their sacrifice by ending the war. This personal grief fueled his determination. The Khalzar were dangerous, but humans were tougher. They endured, adapted, and fought with heart and mind. The engineers now whispered about the strange human will to survive, how it seemed to resist even death itself. It was something they couldn't understand but could no longer ignore. As the fleet regrouped and repaired, Eric sent messages to every corner of Allied space calling for unity, courage, and relentless fight. The swarm was still out there, but so was humanity's indomitable spirit. The war was far from over, but for the first time, hope shone brighter than fear. The galaxy was tense, waiting for the next move, and Eric felt the pressure every day. The Khalzar swarm had not stopped evolving, their attacks growing more cunning and deadly. But humans had changed too. The losses they suffered had hardened them, made them sharper, faster in thought and action, and Eric stood on the command deck of the Resolute, the flagship that had become a symbol of hope. The ship buzzed with quiet energy. Technicians worked on new weapon systems, pilots prepared for missions, and commanders studied endless data streams for any sign of enemy movement. The alliance was stronger than ever, with many species united under one goal: to stop the swarm before it could consume more worlds. Despite all the technology and strategy, it was the human spirit that stood out. Eric often thought about that when he watched his crew, how they faced fear and pain with fierce determination. Each battle had chipped away at their strength, but it had never broken their will. He had seen men and women push themselves beyond limits, standing tall when others would fall. The Khalzar's bioships were terrifying, shifting shape and firing weapons that could dissolve metal and flesh alike. They attacked in swarms that darkened space and used mind-link tactics to coordinate perfectly. But the humans were learning to fight back on their terms. Eric and his engineers developed new defenses, like the pulse shield, that could briefly disrupt the swarm's energy flow and confuse their coordination. Pilots trained relentlessly to fly through deadly fields of biomatter, launching surprise attacks. They were no longer just defending, they were hunting. One mission was especially risky. A Khalzar breeding ground had been discovered in a remote star system, a living factory producing new ships and soldiers. Destroying it would strike a critical blow to the swarm's growth. Eric volunteered to lead the strike team, knowing it could be a one-way trip. The Resolute and several escort ships slipped quietly through space, approaching the organic world. The planet's surface was alive with twisting vines and pulsating chambers, glowing faintly in the darkness. As the ships drew closer, swarms of small fighters surged out like angry hornets. The battle began instantly. Lasers and plasma streaked through space, explosions lighting the void. The human ships moved with precision, dodging and firing, but the enemy was relentless. Eric piloted his fighter at the front lines, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The air was thick with tension. As they reached the planet's surface, a massive biocannon opened, firing waves of corrosive energy that threatened to tear them apart. The fleet pushed forward, shielding each other, coordinating strikes to keep the weapon busy. Finally, Eric's team reached the central breeding chamber, a vast organic structure alive with movement and sound. They launched their charges, setting a countdown before retreat. But the Khalzar reacted fast. A giant guardian emerged, its many limbs crashing through the chamber, attacking with brutal force. Eric and his squadron engaged in a fierce dogfight, dodging crushing blows and firing every weapon they had. The chamber trembled, alive with the rage of the beast. Time slipped away as the countdown ticked down. With one final burst of energy, the charges exploded, tearing the breeding ground apart in a blinding flash. The shockwave rippled through the planet, killing countless enemies and stopping the factory of death. But the victory was costly. Many ships were damaged or destroyed, and several pilots did not return. Eric felt the weight of every loss as they retreated into deep space. The swarm's power weakened but far from broken. The battle showed how fragile their success was and how much more the war would demand. Back on the Resolute, as the crew tended to the wounded and repaired their ships, Eric walked the corridors in silence. He thought about the sacrifices, about the fierce pride of those who fought and fell. Yet he knew the true strength lay in their unyielding will, the human heart that refused to give up even when the odds were against them. The engineers watching from afar began to whisper with unease. This human spirit, this strange mix of courage and stubbornness, was unlike anything they had seen before. It was a force that no technology could crush. The swarm might be vast, its power immense, but humans had something different, something terrifying in its own right. And that would be the key to winning the war. The war had reached a new level of intensity, and every moment was filled with danger and uncertainty. The Khalzar swarm was no longer just attacking to conquer. They were desperate, trying to crush humanity before the humans could grow any stronger. The galaxy watched as the great battle loomed on the horizon, a clash that would decide the fate of many worlds. Eric stood again on the bridge of the Resolute, feeling the weight of the coming storm. The fleet had gathered in a distant, system, the last stronghold before the heart of human space. Every ship was battle-ready, crews trained to the edge of exhaustion but burning with determination. The humans had learned from every fight. They now combined technology and tactics in ways no one had thought possible. Fighters flew in tight formations, using coordinated bursts to break through enemy lines. Capital ships unleashed volleys of energy that could tear apart the bioships. The Alliance's alien members brought unique weapons and knowledge, working alongside humans in perfect unity. As the enemy approached, the stars seemed to darken with the sheer number of swarm vessels. They moved like a living cloud, shifting shapes and forming deadly formations. The Kowalzar commanders had adapted to human strategies, bringing new weapons that could pierce shields and new creatures that could board ships. The battle erupted without warning, a storm of fire and destruction that filled space. The noise of weapons fire, explosions, and alarms echoed through every ship. Eric led his fighter squadron into the heart of the fight, weaving between monstrous bioships, firing missiles and lasers with precision. Around him, human pilots fought with a fearless rage, refusing to back down no matter the cost. The swarm's creatures lashed out with claws and tendrils, trying to rip through hulls and overwhelm the defenders. But the humans' pulse shields held strong, absorbing and redirecting deadly energy. The Allied fleet worked like a single living organism, supporting each other and striking where the enemy was weakest. Yet the cost was high. Ships were lost. Heroes fell and space was littered with debris. Eric felt the pain of every friend lost, but his heart burned with the need to push forward. The key to victory lay ahead, the massive swarm hive ship at the center of the enemy force. If it could be destroyed, the Kowalzar would lose their command and control, breaking their terrible power. Eric's squadron prepared for the final strike, racing through the chaos toward the hive ship's core. Inside, the battle grew even fiercer. The hive was alive with movement, defenders swarming out to meet the attackers. Eric's fighter dodged biolances and energy blasts, weaving through narrow tunnels and explosive traps. The ship trembled under the strain, but the humans pressed on. Reaching the core, Eric launched his final attack, powerful charges designed to bring the hive crashing down. As the explosions tore through the living structure, the ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring. Eric's fighter was caught in the shockwave, tossed wildly through space. He fought to regain control, his vision blurring from the impact. When he finally stabilized, he saw the hive ship breaking apart, pieces flying in every direction. The Kowalzar fleet scattered in retreat, their link shattered. The battle was won, but the victory was hard-earned and costly. Eric drifted in, his damaged fighter surrounded by silence and stars. His heart was heavy with the loss of so many comrades, but also filled with hope. Humanity had faced death and destruction, and survived. They had fought with courage, strength, and a will no enemy could break. As he radioed the fleet to regroup, Eric knew the war was not yet over, but this moment marked a turning point. The Kowalzar might return, but now they feared the humans, and that fear was the greatest weapon of all. Across the galaxy, stories of human resilience and bravery spread like wildfire. The engineers, watching and learning, realized something new. Humans were not just survivors. They were warriors with a spirit no one could tame. The final chapter of the war was still to come, but humanity's place in the stars was secured. Their legacy would be written not just in victories, but in the heart and soul that refused to give up. The war had dragged on for years, but now the final battle was here. The one that would decide everything. The galaxy held its breath as the human fleet, battered but unbroken, gathered for the last fight against the Kowalzar swarm. Eric stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his face set with quiet determination. He knew the risks were higher than ever. The Kowalzar had learned, grown more desperate, and unleashed new weapons that could tear through the strongest armor. But the humans had something stronger still, their will to survive, their refusal to bow down, and their unbreakable spirit. The fleets moved as one, a blend of human and allied ships, their engines humming with power and purpose. Ahead, the Kowalzar swarm waited, a living storm of flesh and metal ready to fight to the death. As the two forces clashed, space exploded into chaos. Beams of light cut through darkness. Missiles streaked like shooting stars, and ships danced a deadly ballet of attack and defense. The Khalzar unleashed terrifying new bio-beasts, massive creatures with razor claws and acidic breath that tore through hulls and sent alarms blaring. The humans fought back with everything they had. Pulse shields flared, plasma cannons roared, and fighters swooped with deadly precision. Amid the destruction, Eric led his squadron straight into the heart of the battle. He pushed his fighter harder than ever, dodging blasts and weaving through the debris of shattered ships. Every move was a test of skill and courage. The pain of loss weighed heavy, but it made them fight fiercer. The hive ship, the massive living fortress of the Khalzar, was their final target. Its destruction would cripple the swarm forever. The humans aimed for its glowing core, knowing it was heavily guarded by layers of bio-armored creatures and deadly traps. Eric's squadron broke through the outer defenses, racing toward the core as explosions rocked the hive. The bio-creatures lashed out, their claws scraping and tearing at the fighters. But the humans pressed on, focused on their mission. When they reached the core, they unleashed a final powerful blast. The hive ship screamed in agony as the charges detonated, ripping apart the living fortress from within. The shockwave sent waves of energy across the battlefield, breaking the swarms, formation and scattering their forces. The Khalzar fleet, once a terrifying unstoppable force, began to fall apart. The remaining ships fled in chaos, their command broken, their terror renewed. The galaxy was quiet again, but it was a silence born of victory and loss. The humans had won, but the cost was great. Many ships were lost. Brave souls had given their lives, and the scars of war would remain. Eric floated in his damaged fighter, the stars shining cold and distant. He thought of those who had fallen, their sacrifices that made this victory possible. The pain was sharp, but so was the pride. Humanity had faced death itself and come out stronger. Their courage had shattered a seemingly endless enemy, and reminded the galaxy that humans were not just survivors. They were warriors, fighters who refused to surrender. The engineers and alien races who had once feared the humans now saw them as a force unlike any other. The stories of their strength spread through the stars, inspiring hope and respect. Eric finally radioed the fleet to regroup, knowing the battle was over, but the war had changed forever. Humanity had proven it could endure anything, rise from ashes, and claim its place in the cosmos. The galaxy had learned a new truth. When humans fight, they fight with a heart no enemy can break, and a spirit that burns brighter than the stars.